October 1st, 1946. Nuremberg. 21 men sit in the dock. They are not merely defendants. They are the living remains of a state apparatus that has ceased to exist. The German Reich died in May 1945. Now, its architects await the legal liquidation of their system. Among them is Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel. His signature turned military bureaucracy into a mechanism for mass murder. He represents the interface between professional soldiering and industrial slaughter. 12 of these men will hear the final verdict, death by hanging. The courtroom is silent. The judges prepare to speak. This sentence marks the end of a process initiated 20 years before the tribunal began. The guards step forward. The reading of the judgment begins. The verdict in Nuremberg marks the end of a process, but its roots reach back 20 years, to Berlin, to the spring of 1915. The Great War ended on November 11, 1918. 10 million soldiers were dead. Germany collapsed. The Treaty of Versailles followed. It was a surgical strike against a state. 13% of German territory vanished. Massive reparations drained the treasury. The once mighty Kaiser's army was sliced down to 100,000 men. 100,000 soldiers. This was the limit. Is this enough to defend 3,000 kilometers of borders? No. It is the size of a police force. The High Command saw a death sentence for the nation. They chose to lie. In 1924, the German General Staff moved to Berlin. Officially, it no longer existed. It was forbidden. Instead, they created the Truppenamt, the Troop Office, a bureaucratic mask for a shadow high command. Officers in civilian suits entered the building. They looked like clerks. Inside, they unrolled banned operational maps. They tracked forbidden munitions. How did they hide an army? They used sport. Glider clubs appeared across the country. The sound of wooden gliders replaced the roar of combat engines. Thousands of pilots trained without a single forbidden fighter jet. Sporting clubs practiced infantry tactics. Nazi militia groups provided the raw manpower. Keitel was the architect of this friction. He managed the reorganization. He turned civilian structures into a military reserve. By the time the world looked closely, the infrastructure for a global war was already operational. The shadow army of the Weimar Republic required specialized tools. It needed the old Prussian school, men like Wilhelm Keitel, who viewed duty as a mechanical process. He was born in September 1882 in the village of Helmscherode. His early life was defined by loss and exclusion. In 1889, his mother died from childbed fever. His father, a stubborn landowner, refused to hand over the family estate. Wilhelm had no inheritance. In 1901, he joined the Prussian army as an artillery officer. He married Lisa Fontaine in April 1909. She was the daughter of a wealthy brewer. Keitel was settling into the life of an unremarkable garrison officer. The Great War accelerated the machinery. In 1914, Keitel commanded a battery on the Western Front. Then came the turning point. A shrapnel grenade exploded in Flanders. Iron fragments tore through his body. He survived the wound, but the front lines were closed to him. The injury forced a transition from the field to the desk. Because of his precision, he was transferred to the General Staff in the spring of 1915. He wasn't a strategist. He was an administrator of destruction. The guns stopped on November 11, 1918. The war ended in 1918, but the staff work never stopped. By January 1933, when Hitler seized power, he inherited a ready-made machine. Keitel had spent years building a covert infrastructure through glider clubs and sporting associations. The foundation for expansion was solid. The veteran of the Great War became a ghost in the system. Why did Hitler choose a man his peers openly despised? Hermann Göring sneered that Keitel possessed the mind of a sergeant in the body of a field marshal. The answer was simple. Hitler did not need a strategist. He needed a shadow. In 1935, Keitel took charge of the Armed Forces Office. By 1938, Hitler dismantled the old War Ministry and created the OKW, the High Command of the Armed Forces. Keitel became its chief. He held the rank of Reich Minister. Technically, he was the second most powerful military figure in the Third Reich. The promotion shocked the officer corps. To the Prussian elite, Keitel was a toady. To Hitler, he was as loyal as a dog. This was the birth of the Keitel interface. He was the administrative bridge between a dictator's whims and the military's execution. By 1933, the infrastructure for total mobilization was already functional. September 1st, 1939. The technical readiness of the Wehrmacht met the administrative precision of terror. Wilhelm Keitel did not just move divisions, he managed the logistics of an organized erasure. This was not a side effect of war. It was a calculated strategy to decapitate a nation. The goal: liquidate the state elite. On September 7, 1939, Reinhard Heydrich marked Polish nobles, clergy, and Jews for death. 5 days later, Keitel expanded the list. He added the Polish intelligentsia to the execution orders. From the fall of 1939 to the spring of 1940, the machinery worked without failure. Approximately 60,000 people died. Government officials, military officers, scientists, teachers, doctors, priests. The state was being stripped of its brain. 100,000 Reichsmarks. That was the price of a general's conscience. While Field Marshal Keitel collected his rewards, his peers watched with growing contempt. 100,000 Reichsmarks equaled 10 years of wages for a skilled worker. It was a purchase of loyalty. In 1940, after the 6-week collapse of France, Hitler promoted Keitel to Field Marshal. The title was high. The morality was non-existent. Keitel publicly hailed Hitler as the greatest warlord of all time. By April 1941, the bureaucracy of murder accelerated. Keitel issued criminal orders authorizing the execution of civilians and non-combatants for any reason. To ensure the machine didn't stall, he provided a legal shield. He signed the decrees granting soldiers total immunity from prosecution. The Führerprinzip, a single word, one leader, one will, absolute obedience. This was the core of Keitel's defense at Nuremberg. He claimed the role of a high-level courier, a man bound by an oath. Could a field marshal be reduced to a mere transmission belt for another man's crimes? The tribunal faced a choice: accept the superior orders doctrine or redefine international law. They chose the latter. Mitigation was off the table. The judges looked at the paper trail. They saw more than a subordinate. They saw an architect of terror. Keitel did not just relay orders, he authored them. In September 1941, he looked at the Eastern Front. He demanded unusual severity. He typed the ratio on a standard military form. For one dead German soldier, the army would execute 50 to 100 communists. 50 to 100. The math was simple. It was also a direct violation of the 1907 Hague Convention. Germany had signed it. Keitel ignored it. The brutality escalated. In October 1942, he signed the Commando Order. No trials, no prisoner status. Allied special forces were to be killed on sight, even if they wore uniforms, even if they held up their hands in surrender. Then came the Night and Fog Decree. The mechanics were clinical. An arrest in the dead of night. No records, no notification to the family. The suspect simply ceased to exist in the eyes of the law. Gestapo officers arrived at private homes. They dragged men into unmarked vans. No paperwork followed. The silence was the point. 7,000 people vanished into this administrative void. While thousands of civilians vanished into the administrative void of the Night and Fog Decree, the war struck the Keitel bloodline. Operation Barbarossa claimed his youngest son, Hans Georg, in July 1941. His eldest, Karl Heinz, disappeared into Soviet captivity. Did the death of his own child trigger a moral awakening? Historical records show none. The field marshal remained a loyal clerk of the apocalypse. He continued to sign orders that sent millions to the same fate as his son. The collapse of the Reich ended his career in May 1945. Allied forces arrested Keitel and transported him to Nuremberg. There, he faced 4 counts: conspiracy, waging aggressive war, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Prison psychiatrist G.M. Gilbert monitored him in his cell. He later described the field marshal as a man with no more backbone than a jellyfish. On October 1, 1946, the International Military Tribunal delivered the verdict, guilty on all charges. Keitel made one final request. He asked for a firing squad. It was the last privilege of the Prussian military caste. The court refused. The judges ruled his actions were not those of a soldier, but of a common criminal. This distinction stripped the German officer corps of its perceived sacredness. On the morning of the execution, the court upheld the sentence of death by hanging. The story shifts from the courtroom to the gym of Nuremberg prison. On October 16, 1946, Sergeant John Woods prepared the ropes. Woods claimed to be an expert. He told the United States Army he had performed executions in Texas and Oklahoma. It was a lie. The Army never verified his record. Why did a standard military procedure turn into a torture session? The physics of a hanging are precise. A long drop uses a calculated length to snap the neck instantly. This causes immediate unconsciousness. Woods ignored the manual. He used the short drop method. This ensured the force was insufficient to break bone. The trapdoor measured only several feet across. It was too small. When Keitel fell, his head smashed against the wooden edges. The sound of bone hitting timber echoed through the room. The rope did not snap his neck. It began to tighten. Standard executions take seconds. Keitel died for 28 minutes. He was 64 years old. He hung there, convulsing, as the air was slowly cut off. Lieutenant Stanley Tillis later confirmed that Woods had deliberately misaligned the nooses. Witnesses saw a smile on the sergeant's face as he pulled the lever. Woods hated Germans. He turned a legal sentence into a technical shambles. Military doctors monitored the pulse until the very end. They officially recorded the time of death at 2:38 in the morning. While doctors confirmed the time of death, lawyers in Nuremberg were already dismantling the old world. A new legal doctrine emerged from the shadow of the gallows. Article 8 of the tribunal's charter appeared on the desks of the prosecution. It was a short text, only 54 words. But these words destroyed the foundation of every army on the planet. Before 1946, a commander's order was absolute. It was a total shield. A soldier was a tool, not a decision-maker. Article 8 changed the calculation. It explicitly prohibited superior orders as a defense for war crimes. The law now demanded a choice. If an order is manifestly illegal, the soldier must refuse. Obedience became a crime. Keitel's defense fought back with complexity. They argued the field marshal had no direct part in the massacres. They claimed he ordered investigations when he heard of atrocities. It was a classic bureaucratic maneuver. The goal was to shift blame down the chain of command. But the scale of the crimes was too systematic for such excuses. The tribunal saw through the paperwork. Responsibility now scales with rank. The higher the position, the heavier the burden. This principle moved from the courtroom to the field manuals of every democratic nation. Modern soldiers now study the Nuremberg precedent during basic training. They learn that a uniform does not override a conscience. They rewrite their own military regulations to include the duty to disobey. The legal ideal of Nuremberg crashed into the reality of Sergeant Wood's gallows. 11 men faced the rope. The tribunal had one goal: to prove that civilization does not stoop to the level of the monster. It explicitly rejected revenge. Justice, not bloodlust, was the mandate. But the execution of Wilhelm Keitel exposed a dark fault line. The process was a shambles. He did not die instantly. He spent 28 minutes strangled by a short drop. The Geneva Convention of 1929 strictly forbade the ill treatment of prisoners. This applied to everyone, even the condemned. Yet Woods essentially tortured 11 men to death in the name of the law. High-minded words about human rights. Then, the sound of a man gasping for air for half an hour. The contrast was absolute. On paper, Nuremberg established a new global morality. In the gym of the prison, it reverted to medieval cruelty. Some argue Keitel earned every second of that agony. He was the man who ordered the execution of 50 to 100 civilians for every German soldier killed. His signed orders murdered millions. He knew the laws. He ignored them. He chose brutality. Yet the tribunal's legal purity dissolved in the sweat and screams of the gallows. Even a righteous court can end in an act of barbarism. The moral high ground was lost to the hangman. The moral debate ends where human biology begins. The case of Wilhelm Keitel is not a study of a monster. It is a technical breakdown of a systemic human failure. Keitel was born to a quiet farming family. He grew up, married, and raised children. He was a career officer, a man of protocols. But the transition from soldier to war criminal happened through a series of standard choices. Can an ordinary person kill on command? Psychology says yes. In the 1960s, the Milgram experiment exposed the mechanics of this collapse. A volunteer sits before a generator. A dial shows the voltage: 150 volts, 300 volts. The volunteer flips a toggle switch. In the next room, a stranger screams. The volunteer hesitates. A man in a gray lab coat, the authority, gives a simple instruction. The experiment requires that you continue. The volunteer sees the red, danger, severe shock label. Their hands shake. The screams turn to silence. Yet 65% of participants delivered the maximum lethal dose of 450 volts. They weren't sadists, they were subordinates. The Keitel effect is a hardwired neural circuit. It bypasses the conscience when a superior takes responsibility. This architecture remains active today. It functions in corporate boardrooms. It operates in government offices and command centers. The setting changes. The mechanics of obedience do not. 65% of people will trigger a lethal shock if told to do so by an authority figure. The Milgram mechanics do not change. This is not a lesson from 1946. It is a blueprint of the modern power structure. The echo in the empty courtroom has faded, but the mechanism remains. Keitel claimed he was a soldier. The law called him a murderer. Article 8 of the Nuremberg Charter stripped away the shield of superior orders. It remains the most dangerous legal precedent for every person in a uniform. This is the core of veiled history. We do not provide comfortable answers. We provide the facts that textbooks omit. If this analysis of Keitel and the breakdown of human conscience shifted your perspective, hit the like button. Subscribe to Veiled History and turn on notifications for our next investigation. Was the execution of Wilhelm Keitel justice or state-sanctioned revenge? Could you disobey an illegal order if it cost you your life? Share your perspective in the comments below.